acid rain and acid precipitation, which is a term that I had never heard before I left for a postdoctoral experience in Sweden. And that there they were very much concerned, and Svante Oden was introduced to me by his sister, who was a professor in the same institute where I was on a postdoctoral assignment. And so meeting him on December 11th in 1965 is when my first awareness of the acid precipitation phenomenon was known to me. It was known in Europe long before that, and I even wrote a history that talks about how discoveries were made in Britain in 1852, which were crucially important in developing awareness of the notion that precipitation was acid, especially in towns where fossil fuels were being burned to heat people's homes and for other purposes, industrial purposes and so on. And what Oden did, he called attention to the transfer of these materials across boundaries. So transboundary transport of acidic and acidifying substances became a big deal in Europe, and that's where my education about acid precipitation began. I mentioned Svante Oden as the originator of the idea as a public issue, not so much as a scientific issue, but as a public issue. And he published a notation in the Dagens Nyheter, the major newspaper of Stockholm, calling attention to an insidious chemical warfare among the nations of Europe. And that phrase got the press's attention, and that led to a major study, which was not done by Oden, but was done by other people who had less of the controversy associated with it than Oden did. His ideas were contrary to prevalent attitudes that emissions fell out of the atmosphere very close and were not transported across boundaries. And so I invited Svante Oden to come to the United States in the 1970s. And he gave a series of lectures in 14 institutions, and one of them was to the U.S. Forest Service. And Doschinger was one of the people who heard those lectures, was inspired, and he created the first international symposium on acid precipitation and the forest ecosystem. And after that major conference, which was led by both Doschinger and Saliga at Ohio State University, a follow-up conference was held, and the recommendation was made that we should establish in this country a permanent precipitation chemistry network that would measure the chemical climate of various parts, and temporal and spatial trends, differences between what is going on in cities, outside cities, in the countryside as a whole, and how far these substances were being nutrient substances, injurious substances, inert substances that didn't bother ecosystems, didn't help them or hinder them. That's what. So we began a process of establishing a permanent network, and that network is now 38 years old.